Welcome to Face to Face, and today we're going to talk about nuclear weapons. We're going to talk about Ukraine. We're going to talk about non-violence. We're going to talk about the United Nations. And I'm with Mary Yelenick from Pax Christi. Mary, welcome to Face to Face. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, David.
And really, you are working on against nuclear weapons and for non-violence for I don't know how many years, and you are also connected with the UN. So do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yes, I am the main representative at the United Nations for an NGO. NGO stands for non-governmental organization, and our NGO is Pax Christi International, which is a global Catholic movement for peace and nonviolence, which is headquartered in Brussels. Pax Christi International was founded right after World War II on the initiative of a French woman who wanted to make peace with her German neighbors. She wanted reconciliation. So this organization, which is now in many places in the world, tens and tens of cities and small towns and major countries, works very hard to promote the idea that nonviolence is the only solution to human problems, that war only begets war, that killing guarantees another cycle of killing, and that vengeance has no place, that exploring the causes of an issue and then giving each other time to explain what we've done and why we've done it, and then offering some kind of forgiveness is the only way that we can move together on this planet.
That's not what's happening now in many places. And so maybe can you tell us a little bit how do you see the situation in Ukraine? And so we can go from there to non-violence and a little bit what has to be done to transform that situation.
Yeah, well, it's a terrible situation. It's just ghastly. And I feel personally responsible in many ways when I see the suffering of the people, when I see these people who are losing their homes, and I see the bodies of people outside of their homes. There was a photograph of a woman with her house keys, and she was dead on the ground. And you see little children being just butchered. It's heartbreaking, and it makes me so upset, and it makes me angry at our own failures. I think this is something, nothing happens in a vacuum. Things happen over time. I know that over time, Putin, and I've heard his name is pronounced that way in Russian, so I'll try to say it, Putin, has been evidencing a great deal of angst and insecurity because NATO and the United States have been moving closer to his border. And I can only think of what happened in Cuba when there were nuclear weapons stationed by then the Soviet Union 90 miles away from us, and how the United States reacted and how upset and frightened the world was. And I think Putin was feeling something of that. He has seen the United States over time breach treaties, say we're no longer going to honor these treaties we've signed, and now moving closer to his borders. Unlike the United States, which has oceans on both sides, Russia has no natural barriers. And so when you see an organization that was devised after the World War and directed against an ally in that war, there's just something very wrong about our history. And I think this could have been prevented had we acted differently. But now we're there, so we're there.
And Russia lost 28 million people during World War II. I mean, I think I didn't see too many media covering that aspect of the historical background to really give a larger picture of the conflict.
Yes, and when some people here joke about Putin talking about his fear of Nazism. Well, he's afraid of Nazism. He lost his father.
Yeah,
they went through that war. The Russian people suffered more than certainly we did in that war. So we have to understand the psychology and what have we done this deliberately? And you just wonder, have we failed to address others' concerns because of our own reliance on the military-industrial complex, because we like solving problems that way? I don't know.
And NATO on top of Europe, I think from my point of view, it's a mistake. You cannot have a democratical institution covering so many countries, and on top of it, having a military structure who cover that same political institution. It doesn't kill one will have to kill the other to be able to survive, because either you see it through military action, either you see it through democratical and institutional and diplomatical view, but you cannot have both institutions covering Europe. I think that was the biggest mistake of Europe with NATO.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And some of the ambassadors here early on said it was a mistake for the United States to expand. Your point about them all being included is unwieldy at best. But also the fact that we have such a strong international structure based on what? Weapons? This is what we do? What if we had a strong international system based on schooling or housing or feeding each other? What could we do with something NATO worried about solving people's problems instead of gunning people down?
Yeah, or else, because Italia, when the virus started in Italia, Europe didn't help.
Yeah, that's right.
Italia was a very complicated situation for many months without any help from Europe, and they had to do this blackout, blocking every situation. And when Italy with having a strong tourism economy, I mean, it was very complicated for Italy, and they didn't receive any help. I mean, they wish we would have received the help that Ukraine is getting now. So yeah. I mean, it's really it's very surprising the way things have been developed in the last few months.
Can you imagine if we were devoting 2% of our GDP on vaccines, on food? We would solve so many of the world's problems, some of the frustration, some of the anger, some of the helplessness that people feel, which often translates into violence, would have been alleviated. If people feel respected and noticed and heard, we act differently with each other.
So Pax Christi is part of ICAN, and ICAN has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and maybe you want to take it from there with the treaty.
Yes, we were one of the first members of ICAN going back 12 years. In 2017, the treaty finally went into effect. It didn't become law until last year, because under the treaty's provisions, there had to be a certain number of countries that both signed it, we had enough signatures, but they also had to ratify it, which entails going through the local legislative process. But now there are 60 ratifications, and it went into effect last January when there were 50 ratifications. So it's binding law upon the signatories. It's a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. It makes it illegal to possess, to sell, to develop, to transport, anything having to do with nuclear weapons. Of course, the nuclear nations, the 9 nations that own nuclear weapons, have not signed the treaty. The first meeting of states parties of the treaty is taking place in Vienna. It was postponed because of COVID for a year, but it's taking place in June in Vienna. So we anticipate some very interesting discussions, and some of the countries that have not yet signed the treaty are actually going to be there as observers, which I think is a very good sign. The fact that nuclear weapons is suddenly on everybody's mind is important, I think, because for so long, back in the 80s, we had the sense that nuclear weapons were going to be abolished because there was this vast popular movement, including in New York, where more than 1 million people came in opposition to nuclear weapons. And then over time, it sort of became a non-entity. People said, oh, it's not a problem, da-da-da-da. But now that people are feeling a nuclear fear every day, people are thinking about the consequences of having weapons and what happens if they're stolen, if they're lost, if there's a misfire. There was a misfire of a weapon from India to Pakistan during the same time that the Ukraine invasion took place, and so people weren't aware of it so much. But if people say now, oh, we need nuclear weapons because of this, if we're afraid now, if more nations have nuclear weapons, will you be safer? I don't think so.
And Putin put an alert on his nuclear base. So my story was, so now what is the usefulness of nuclear weapon? Because what are we going to do? I mean, Europe's going to do what? And then Russia's going to...
We can either blow up the world.
It's like now you have India situation. It's a very concrete moment in history where we are faced with a threat of nuclear weapon. And what are we going to do? How can we position ourselves in front of that imminent danger was meaningless and doesn't resolve anything. So and cost, it's really for the last 30-40 years, it's really in aberration of how he has been dealt with.
It's such a waste of time and money, and it puts all of us at risk. We could all be gone in an instant because of this nonsense. We've got to stop it. We've got to eliminate every nuclear weapon.
Okay, so let's talk about the media, because we have the impression that you have some issue where nobody care, and you have many conflicts who are not covered really by the media, and so people don't know, and so the media don't cover them, and so on and so forth. And then you have this situation in Ukraine with really into the front page of every newspaper, every TV channel, and portray everybody very dehumanizing everything, more or less. So generating more and more violence. How do you see this situation?
Well, two things. Early on, I think there was a chance when we saw some of the footage early on, when some of the young Russian soldiers, and these are kids, these are 18 and 19-year-old kids who were sent over to Ukraine, where a lot of them have family members, they speak the same language, they have the same history, and they're told to kill these people. Well, a lot of them surrendered early on. And you see these wonderful pictures of Ukrainians welcoming them in one case, holding up a phone to a young Russian soldier who had surrendered so he could talk to his mom. Imagine if they had been welcomed in every community like that. Do you think there'd be this mass murder? If someone shoots at you, you're going to shoot back, probably. Even if you hadn't planned to, you're going to be terrified. But if someone is described as an enemy and you come to face with them and say, wait a minute, something's wrong here, I'm being lied to, what would that do? So early on in any conflict, there's an opportunity to practice nonviolence resistance. And we've seen a lot of examples of that. There were situations in which, for example, Ukrainians were giving fruit to the soldiers as they came in. That rehumanizes people. War is a process of dehumanizing people. Like the United States and Vietnam, we would come up with different names for people. They weren't people, they were some epithet.
Yeah.
If you can dehumanize people, it's a lot easier to shoot them. If they treat you with respect, if they come up to you and say, for example, there was another situation in which there was a mayor who was abducted, apparently, by Russian soldiers in a town. And all the people of the town showed up in the town square without weapons and stood there protesting. And that power caused them to release the mayor. It was nonviolence. It was the person-to-person contact. It was not teaching ourselves to view the other as a demon. That's the only way that things can happen in the life. There's an excellent book called Why Civil Resistance Works. It's by Maria Stefan and Erica Chenoweth. It was written maybe 10 years ago, but it concludes, and it's based on a lot of data, and it's been updated. The data has been consistent, that nonviolent resistance is twice as likely as armed resistance to have a lasting effect. And it just makes sense.
Yeah. There's many books on studies of nonviolence, where you need 10% of the population to get involved, and the long-term resolution of a conflict through nonviolence is much more powerful than a conflict resolved with violence.
Yeah.
But we keep sending, Biden just put another $800 million to help Ukraine. So that's what I'm trying to understand. What is the logic there? Because it just keep on increasing the destruction, increase the migration of people. Europe going to have to deal with 5 million or 6 million of immigrants. And I'm telling you, this is not a good time in Europe to deal with immigration. The far right is getting ground, and it's going to be an issue to really polarize the population and get it. It's really it's playing with fire in many different levels, through food production affecting Africa. The price of food is getting all over the place. So I'm not getting really, why do we see this as a solution where in reality it's getting us to the ground? It's really
the military will just prolong the suffering. We'll see more people tomorrow who will be dead because we have military. operations going on. They wouldn't be dead if we stopped right now and said, let's have a ceasefire, let's talk, let's resolve this. Every war is resolved with a resolution. Let's have the resolution sooner than later. Let's listen to each other. Let's listen to your legitimate concerns. Let's concede something if we have to. NATO doesn't need to be on Russia's border. It doesn't need to be on Russia's border. That's a simple.
So, I mean, and then what can we back off? I mean, I don't get it. It's every conflict, you see a conflict on the street, you're not going to go and bring all the weapons of the neighborhood and kill everybody on that street. You back off, you make space, you try to get the people out of that conflict and I'm not getting this story there.
It doesn't make sense. War doesn't make sense. It just creates the seeds for a new war. That's all it does. And it's happened World War II to World War I created World War II. World War II created this fear. The people who are sending in the weapons now, the munitions manufacturers, are just guaranteeing that if this planet survives, their children will be fighting another war. That's all that's happening.
Yeah.
So it's good for business. Hey, it's good for business.
But this business, we have banned some business because they were bad, and I think we should ban them. Really, it's not helping.
Like nuclear weapons, we have to go after the manufacturers. We have to stop this weapons merchandising and nuclear weapons merchandising. Go where the pocketbook is. That's the strength. That's why the Congress people, so many of them bought off because they have these contributions from these lobbyists for the military. Well,
this is the problem in the US. The US, I mean, I look at that story until we destructure, we disorganize the production of weapons in the US, because every state is involved into this business. Yes. State by state, it's factory by factory, it's research centers, university, pension fund, investment. I mean, you have all level of structure to create this machine of destruction. It's really it's not just a federal problem in the US. It's every state and every lot of pieces have to be put together to be able to de-escalate the story.
Yes, every congressional district brags about how many jobs it provides.
Exactly.
And there are so many. And the same thing is true with nuclear weapons. There are so many states implicated now with hosting nuclear weapons or facilities or manufacturing. So it's hard to pull the plug, because then you hurt local people. You've got to substitute something else.
Yeah. The UN.
Difficult time.
It's very complicated for the UN, no?
It's interesting because this incident, this horrible, that's not incident, but this time in history shows the insidiousness, in one sense, of those who came up with the veto power at the United Nations. That was not a mistake. It was the winning powers in World War II who said, let's have a place where we can all get together and talk, which was essential. Thank God we have the United Nations. But they also said, but we have a veto power. So if there's some resolution we don't like, it won't go forward. And that's what's been happening, because the United States and Russia have spent the last 2 years trading vetoes. China, not so much, but it's Russia and the United States, this terrible enmity that keeps going on. And they're relegating the United Nations Security Council fairly useless in many senses. So that's why there was a resolution by the General Assembly with respect to Ukraine, because if the United Nations Security Council is deadlocked in that way, they can kick something over to the General Assembly for the nations to speak. And they spoke very loudly.
Yeah.
Opposing this, very loudly.
And I think it was much more interesting than what the Security Council was doing. Because at least we can get different point of view from different places who have different type of experiences. So not everybody sees the world the same way.
That's right. So going forward, people say, why doesn't there be reform? There's a lot of call for reform, and there needs to be reform in the United Nations. The problem is, if the 5 nuclear nations that are on the Security Council don't want reform to happen, it'll have to be probably a different kind of system that evolves. But people are working hard on that, because this points out the shortcomings of the United Nations. It has enormous strengths, but for the United Nations, we would have a free-for-all. It's a very important thing. And the United Nations does wonderful things for feeding people, for housing people, for identifying problems, for identifying problems with gender discrimination, race discrimination globally. So it's essential. The United Nations is essential.
And it's just the beginning. It's just the from there. We should not destroy from there. It should be developed and enrich and put more energy, resources. It's really it's essential to be able to have a platform where countries and population can get their word and structure.
Yeah, and even as an NGO representative, we are on certain working groups, NGO working groups. And so, for example, we can meet in different missions with ambassadors, and it's all off the record, but we ask questions, we can learn, and my own views have changed in many ways from listening to people describe their own realities and their own rationales for acting the way or not acting the way they choose to. So that conversation, even among NGOs, is very rich, and it helps all of us. I can only imagine what happens to countries who are able to talk to each other that way, because there's no other forum for them to talk. So it's a tremendous place to exchange and to change and to understand more of the world.
Because we were like it or not, we are all connected. I mean, it's now it's a given. We have one planet, one Earth. It's round, and we are all the borders are really in our upstairs in our mind. But
you would think that shot from the spacecraft.
I know.
Blue marble. That's it, folks. And so these people over here don't like these people over here, and they're going to blow up the whole thing because they don't like it. It's just nuts. It's just nuts. We know biologically we're connected.
Yeah.
You know, when we express compassion with someone else, the oxytocin that's released into our body makes us feel better. It makes us better human beings. We are biologically connected, and I think anybody who's religious in any sense, I think all religions recognize that as well. So why we're acting in ways that are contrary to our biology is beyond me. It's money. It's money.
Thank you very much, Mary. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we will talk very soon.
I look forward to it. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you so much. That was your show Face to Face, and keep please watching your news on presenza.com. And don't forget to subscribe, and hope to see you very soon. Thank you very much.